Sound check. Could the interpretation please do a sound check on the English stream?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 9. 210.
Merci. En français maintenant. Merci.
We're going in just 1 minute, and it'll be a quick minute.
She can't do everything.
She cannot do it all. Good morning, or good afternoon. Welcome to the 8th joint meeting of Planning and Housing Committee and the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded and never surrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I know we have regrets from Councillor Brockington, but otherwise, could I ask the coordinator to do a roll call, please?
Councillor Luloff.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Councillor Dudas.
Ici.
Councillor Curry. Here. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Troster. Here. Councillor Brockington. Councillor Kitts. Here. Councillor Skalski. Here. Councillor Lowe.
Present.
Vice Chair Kelly.
Present.
Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
Chair Brown.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. No chair statement. Are there any declarations of interest today? I don't see any. Are the minutes of our 7th meeting of Wednesday, December the 17th confirmed? Thank you. So we will receive a presentation on the official plan update, growth projections. I'm in your hands.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Joint Committee. Joining us today are members of our consulting team from Hemson. We have Stefan Krzuvinich on my left, followed by Russell Matthew at the end. I'll just provide a brief background to how we got to where we are today. This goes back to a few joint committees ago, back in October 2024, when Council adopted a new urban and village expansion framework. And part of that framework included a new application category to consider expansion applications, really on the back of a new PPS and changes to the Planning Act that really enabled those applications to come forward, that allowed landowners to provide that appeal right. But also as part of that framework was beginning an update to our growth projections in an official plan in 2025. On June 18th last year, at Joint Committee, we began the official plan update for our growth projections and outlined our scope of work. And that was really a 3-step process. The first step was the consideration of growth projections from the Ministry of Finance and how those population projections would be converted into housing and employment projections, which is what municipalities need to do. And then the next step would be to identify or update our growth management strategy to identify how we would allocate that growth within the city. And the third step, if required, would be a selection criteria and process for any new expansion lands needed to accommodate that growth. And also non-growth related amendments such as the village plan review. So with that, I will turn it over to Stefan, who will take us through a presentation.
Thank you, Royce, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm here with my colleague, Russell Matthew, who's helped the city with growth forecasting and growth management matters for many years, and he will assist me answering questions. But I have 8 slides and plan to speak to you today for about 15 minutes. As Royce said, this is a three-part assignment, and Hemson's been retained to assist with the first two pieces of it. And we're going to speak to you today about the first piece, which is the growth forecasts to 2051. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm going to start with population. And as you all know, Ottawa's population has been growing very quickly. It is, in fact, one of the fastest growing urban centres in the province. And as Royce said, the population forecasts in our report that have been presented to you today are based on the Ministry of Finance population projections to 2051 that were released last summer. And the use of these projections is directed by the Provincial Policy Statement, the PPS 2024. So you can see on the graph here, the projections anticipate the growth in the city to be quite high, certainly higher over the next 25 years than it was over the last 25 years. And you can see, if you look at the gold line on the graph there, that population growth since 2001 has been pretty steady. It has its ups and downs, of course. And the second thing to note is that the finance projections have population growth to be high, but not quite as high as the recent population growth surge that's been experienced here, specifically between 2021 and around 2023, 2024. We'll talk a little bit about that growth surge on the next slide. Suffice to say that the city's population is projected to grow to about 1.7 million people by 2051. That's growth of over 500,000 people, or about 20,000 people per year. Next slide, please. So population growth is driven by two main phenomena. There's the natural increase that occurs as births outnumber deaths, and there is net migration. And it will be net migration that drives population growth in Ottawa over the long term, with most of that migration coming from international sources. If you look at the chart here on the screen, you can see the different components of population growth, both historically and what the Ministry of Finance is projecting moving forward. And so each component of the bar is a different source of population growth, and the stuff you see in the green is your natural increase, and so that's been an important source of population growth in the past, but it's becoming less and less important moving forward, and it will continue to decrease as we move through the period to 2051. Over the last decade, during this population growth surge, you can see that there's been a lot of population increase arising from these international migration streams, and in particular from non-permanent residents as well, particularly since 2016. Both of these streams of migration are heavily influenced by federal government policy, and federal government policy in respect of non-permanent residents, particularly international students, has placed caps on enrollment, which is going to curtail growth in that area. And the policy has also lowered immigration targets for permanent residents. I should say that the lower immigration targets that are now in place in the historical context are still very, very high. And so moving forward, if you look at the table, you can see that overall migration will be increasingly the main source of growth in the city, and 2/3 of all growth will come from international migration, and the non-permanent resident stream will be much less than it has been in the recent past. Next slide, please. Ultimately, step 2 of this exercise will be looking at land needs, and most of the land that the city needs, it will be for housing. So to understand what the housing land needs are, we need to know how households are formed, and we need to know what type of housing those households will need and want. There's been lots of discussion about household formation in recent years, with particular attention or concern being expressed about how younger age groups are or are not able to form households. And so we've looked at this in some detail in our report, I think it's worth pointing out that household formation rates for young people, and in fact for most age groups, has been declining for many decades. And those declines have been driven by social and cultural changes. But more recently, we've seen a decline in housing affordability that has probably contributed to lower household formation for the younger age groups and perhaps other age groups as well. So how have we treated that in the forecasts? If you look at the table there, you can see these are the formation rates for young adults in their 20s and early 30s, and you can see that it's been declining since the mid-1980s. And you can see that in the last few years, we've seen a sharp decrease, and that's probably where the affordability impact is being felt. So moving forward, we have assumed that household formation will correct itself and will return to the levels that it was at the 2021 census. Next slide, please. Our forecasts explicitly recognize that there's really a very important role in the housing market being played by missing middle housing, and particular additional residential units, or these ARUs, which sort of function as a very good entry point into the housing market for a lot of age groups, particularly young people who, have changing preferences and living arrangements in their early 20s and 30s. ARUs have seen a huge spike in the city and in many other urban centers in Ontario in recent years. And part of that is the market, part of that is supportive planning policies, and the market has certainly responded to that environment. So the forecast that we have, as I say, recognizes the growing role of ARUs and the category of duplexes in Stats Canada data, which they're often captured in. And you'll see tables in our report that show the housing forecast both under the census definitions of duplexes and a recategorization of these duplexes into ARUs that will help city planning for these kinds of units moving forward. Next slide, please. So just with respect to households and housing, it's clear that there's going to be a lot of housing need moving forward. Household growth will accelerate and will actually grow at a faster rate than population growth. And you will likely see a broader range and mix of housing moving forward than we've seen in the past. Part of that is responding to demographic change, but part of that is also responding to changes in the market that are already taking place. And if you look at the graph there, you can see that historically, ground-related housing forms, single, semi-detached houses and row houses have been the predominant housing form in the city. But in the recent past, we've seen the introduction of ARUs as an important component of the market, and particularly there's been a lot of apartments constructed in the city. That's not to say that single detached units won't continue to play an important role in meeting housing demand moving forward, but it'll be a much more greater range and mix of housing moving forward. Next slide, please. We're also looking at employment and the land needs associated with employment growth through this exercise. So the forecasts in our report anticipate robust employment growth in the city to 2051, and part of that, of course, is driven by the population growth. Recognizing the sort of the difficulties we're currently under, the forecast has fairly slow growth in the next few years, but after that, it's pretty steady to 2051. The ratio of jobs to people is anticipated to go down because we do have an aging population, and it will continue to age right through the next 25 years. Ottawa has a fairly diverse labor force and economic base. There are a significant number of jobs that will be located in sort of large-scale freestanding offices, of which there are a lot in Ottawa relative to other urban places, and that's a reflection of course, your large government workforce and tech headquarters that you have here. But there will be a lot of jobs in urban and rural population-related centres. That's a little bit more predictable than the office stuff, and that is directly related to the population growth. There will be a significant number of jobs still on designated employment areas that you will have to plan for. And then there are job clusters as well in the rural areas, and there's a work at home component as well. Next slide, please. So, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to finish up by sort of restating what Royce said at the beginning. This is a three-part assignment, with part one focused on the growth forecasts, part two focused on the growth management strategy, which will be looking at land needs arising from the growth forecasts, and then part three, which would be led by staff, looking at if there's a need for any potential settlement boundary expansions, looking at where those might be best appropriately located. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a good presentation, and of course the report contains some significant additional granularity on all those figures, so I encourage members to take a look at that. Before we move into the four delegations who have signed up to speak today, we did receive one motion ahead of time. Councillor Johnson, did you want to introduce that motion now?
Thank you, Chair. Whereas the City of Ottawa's official plan update growth project confirms that Ottawa will continue to grow strongly over the next 25 years and will remain one of Ontario's fastest growing large cities. And whereas the number of households in Ottawa is expected to increase significantly by 2051 with continued growth in both older adult and youth populations. Whereas the number of households in Ottawa is expected to increase from just over 433,000 in 2024 to nearly 700,000 by 2051, and whereas the forecasts indicate rapid growth in older adult cohorts, and these trends will increase demand for accessible housing, age-friendly community design, and inclusive access to city services and facilities. Whereas the population aged 0 to 4 is expected to increase steadily over the projection period, and this growth will support ongoing demand for childcare, schools, post-secondary institutions, rec facilities, and family-oriented housing. Whereas school site planning, capital funding, and decisions regarding school construction, consolidation, and surplus declarations fall under the jurisdiction of the Province of Ontario and local school boards pursuant to provincial legislation. And whereas under the council-approved real estate acquisition policy, the city may only initiate acquisitions where a municipal program need has been identified and funding has been approved or identified. Therefore, be it resolved that staff review and report back on the city's internal process and criteria for assessing municipal interest in surplus school properties, taking into consideration our current needs and needs projected in the growth forecast, with a report to be provided to council in 2027. And be it further resolved that staff provide an updated list of schools that we know are coming for sale and the city's position on them within the next 30 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm not aware of any other motions, but before we go into delegations, are there any? And I don't see any. So, sorry? We'll go into delegations and then we'll get into questions for staff. So the first delegation signed up today is Warren Waters with the Federation of Citizens Associations. Hi, Warren.
Good afternoon. Well, we've got to wonder if the report is a prelude to expanding the urban boundary, increasing intensification, or both, or neither. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In truth, all this excitement about 1.7 million people, we're kind of losing track. And the FCA also recognizes that this council has no authority to revise any of the ministry's population projections, so our delegation is not about those numbers. Instead, we're just focusing on the households and dwelling units. We're here to look at the math behind the report, and we're asking that you not endorse this report without clearer assumptions, showing the uncertainty ranges of those assumptions and applying that uncertainty to test the sensitivity of the resulting housing and employment predictions. In other words, don't rely on luck. Next slide, please. Like the best astrologers and soothsayers, Hempson gives us both the illusion of certainty and the illusion of choice. Forecasts, predictions, crystal balls, whatever you call it, one thing they're never really about is the future. They're about our past, our present, our current hopes, fears, desires, or in this case, just our lack of understanding. Next slide. Hempson claims it's not a forecast, it's just a projection of recent trends. It says it ignores the economic assumptions or policy interventions. Does anyone still believe our future is going to be a continuation of our past? No ruptures in the international order? The report says it only projects recent trends and does not include explicit economic assumptions. Note, however, the assumptions are implicit in the household formation and housing typology preferences. Reversing the recent slowing of migration, reversing the long-term slowing of household formation, reversing the decreasing demand for single and semi-detached housing, those are all structural changes with unaddressed assumptions and uncertainties that are going to affect the calculations in ways that are not clear. Next slide. They've given us a single precise number for households and dwelling units for 2051. Now, forecasts don't predict the future with certainty. They're right. They say what happens if trends persist. Projections are what could be rather than what's likely to be, and they're only as valid as the assumptions on which they're built. But Hempson report shows neither a range of uncertainty or the sensitivity of their predictions to alternative assumptions. Next slide. So why would household formation rates return to their 2021 levels? How uncertain is that assumption? What's the sensitivity of the final dwelling unit projections to that amount of uncertainty? The report says that young adults living in their parents' basement is just a cyclical phase, and they'll all move out the moment inflation drops. But for every $100 that the rent goes up, how many young adults decide that living with mom and dad isn't so bad after all? If we're just off by 1%, this demand elasticity assumption, we're over planning by about 7,000 units. If we're off by 10%, 70,000 units. That's a lot of empty drywall if the bank of mom and dad stays the only affordable option in town. But if housing costs remain structurally decoupled from local incomes due to outside investor demand or supply constraints, the cyclical rebound may never occur. If the formation rates do not rebound, but remain suppressed, the total dwelling unit requirement drops significantly, leading to a potential oversupply. If housing affordability doesn't improve, the premise that formation rates will recover would fail. The habit of multi-generational living may become permanent, as seen in Europe, rather than just a temporary delay. So restoring affordability to pre-pandemic levels requires significant price corrections or wage growth, neither of which are being forecast. Hempson assumes that household formation rates will reverse. That relies on housing affordability improving and the economy remaining robust. Do we feel that lucky? Next. Let's test the assumptions used to justify the future changes in the housing preference by age. This table shows that the apartment share drops from 41% to 20%. Single detached homes drops from 24% to 12% and then rebounds up to 39% in the same period. Row houses also see an increase in share and ARU's share declines, the opposite of what was just presented. If the future is high density, Hempson's own tables show the apartment share dropping by half. Meanwhile, semi-detached homes and row houses are making a comeback. The text says one thing, but the numbers are doing a complete U-turn. This table that I took these numbers from, B6, predict a shift away from apartments and ARUs towards single detached homes. But the text actually claims the opposite will occur. Quoting from page 27, while single detached dwellings will continue to grow in absolute terms, their share of the total household growth declines relative to more compact forms. How uncertain are these assumptions? How sensitive are the dwelling unit projections to these assumptions? I think that we need to explicitly test the sensitivity of assumed changes in housing typology preferences to avoid over-planning for units that the market can't actually absorb. Next. The report says it assumes a massive shift of seniors into apartments. Historical data and current city policy explicitly says that seniors prefer to age in place in single detached homes. If even 10% more seniors stay in their current homes than Hempson assumes, we'll face a deficit of 27,000 ground-oriented units and a surplus of apartments.
Walter, just a warning, you are out of time. If you could wrap it up.
I'll wrap up with the last slide, please. Don't accept a report that appears contradictory and doesn't even document either the sensitivity, uncertainty ranges, or even all of their one scenario's assumptions. While we support the compact, connected, complete communities, intensification without corresponding increase in infrastructure will just lead to vertical sprawl, with the costs being borne by families being forced out of the city. Let's make sure that when 2051 rolls around, we aren't just hoping our luck improves. Luck is not a planning strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Councillor Curry?
Thank you. Walter, the parts on your point on your slide that were bulleted that showed what they didn't account for, significant things, long-term structural changes in the economy. That's a significant thing. I agree with everything you're saying. The challenge I have is that, and you started off and said that, the province is setting these numbers and what can we do? But you're asking us to not receive this report, accept this report. And so I guess then I would say to you, and then what?
The report can be improved. All of those assumptions can be documented, and you can show the range of uncertainties around each of the assumptions and calculate how those would affect the sensitivity of the resulting outputs. It's a simple mathematical problem. Hempson probably has all the spreadsheets already. It's just another run of the spreadsheet.
Okay, we can definitely ask about that. The one other thing I would ask you is, did you ever do the work, because it looks like you've done lots of work here, to look at what projections were in the past and what the actuals were, sort of like budget and then actuals, but forecasts and then actuals?
I generally have very little faith in forecasts or projections because I used to do it for a living. So I know the pitfalls. There's a lot of wishful thinking, and it's important that we just simply be explicit about what those wishes are and not try to hide them. We need to make forecasts. We need to make predictions. They're never going to turn out exactly the way we want, or the way we hope, or the way we expect, but we won't know unless we look at the sensitivity of our forecasts to those varying assumptions, those uncertainties. So I'm not in the business of looking back. I'm trying to look forward, like Hempson, like the planning department is as well, and it can be done well, but this isn't good enough.
Okay, I just was going to reference that there are a lot of people who do that work, not in this realm, but in just for investment purposes, and they find that mostly everything's just luck.
Well, 1 or 2 years, you can project 1 or 2 years quite confidently, even up to 5 if you're lucky. Beyond 5, it starts getting more and more uncertain, and for 25. I'm doubtful whether you can have much faith in it. That's why you need to have alternative scenarios. You can't rely on one projection. And the province's own guidelines even encourage the use of scenarios and looking at uncertainties. They haven't adopted that approach here. They've stuck with just one scenario.
Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Warren. Great to see you. I appreciate very much your presentation. I just wanted to get the understanding from your perspective. So you're representing FCA today, or is it Warren?
The FCA reluctantly agreed. There's a number of members of our board who couldn't understand the math in the report, and I sympathize with that, but they just simply abstained. So they let me use the FCA's name.
Okay, no problem. So I just wanted to understand for our purposes, because I would agree with you, and certainly, there's been other aspects of the city's work where I had hoped to see more scenarios, for example, with the transportation master plan, second phase, whether we could have some various scenarios of where we spent our money and different outcomes. Anyway, all this to say it's something I share your frustration. I do wonder from the FCA's perspective when it comes to, where you're trying to go in your presentation. You really would like to see decision making improved, but what I'm not hearing and what I wouldn't want to assume is that the FCA is taking a position in terms of urban boundary expansion or otherwise, directing their interest in particular land uses. I didn't hear that, but just want to confirm that really is focused on the outputs of the report being improved. Is that correct?
Yes, getting into boundary and intensification or both or neither. That's too early. Let's not talk about that now.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for helping me to understand the bounds of your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir, for your delegation. I think we're on the same page in terms of the risks that you identified, and I've certainly had extensive conversations with staff about the report over the past few days. And one thing that I'll be identifying is, so we understand and we heard from Hemson, this is step one of a 3-step process. Legal services made it very clear in the report that every step carries consequences, has weight over the process. So what I wanted to ask you, because I share the same concern that what we have here is a single path reference, and we are basing projections on that single path. You were talking about whether it's alternative scenarios or variations, but I heard you mention that provincial guidelines recommend that there be multiple scenarios. You said something to that effect. Could you clarify what you meant by that?
It's not scenarios. The guidelines allows municipalities to try and quantify the uncertainty of their assumptions, recognizing that any assumption has some uncertainty. Quantify the degree of uncertainty to try and estimate ranges of uncertainty for each of those assumptions, and then run sensitivity tests to see how that uncertainty would affect the outputs. So that amounts to looking at high and low scenarios, but it's simply quantifying the uncertainty of the assumption.
And did you say, forgive me, did you say that the provincial guidelines allow for municipalities to do that or recommend that they do that?
I'm not. You have to ask staff.
Okay.
You have to ask staff.
But what I think I heard you say, whether it's allow or recommend, you said that the provincial guidelines municipalities to quantify the degree of uncertainty.
They recognize that can be done. Yes.
If that is the case, are you saying that in what you see in the Hemson report that they have or have not quantified that degree of uncertainty?
They have not.
And that another thing that municipalities could do is to run sensitivity tests based on quantifying that?
Based on the range of uncertainties for each of the assumptions.
Okay, and so you're saying that you do not see that in the Hemson report, but that allowance is something that municipalities could pursue which runs along with provincial guidelines?
To my understanding, but I'm not a specialist.
Neither am I. I'll get confirmation of that from staff, but I just wanted to understand that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Devine. I guess I would ask, we're not doing a one and done forecast for the next 25 years with the extreme risks of misforecasting what it's going to be like 25 years from now. It's a rolling 5-year look at the numbers. If we were on the basis of this to approve 2,000 too many apartments in the next 5 years, those would presumably be absorbed when we're looking at a 25-year forecast of requiring 220,000 new homes in subsequent 5-year periods. How big are the risks really when we're looking at a cycle of 5-year updates with the opportunity to revisit some of the assumptions?
That's a good question for Hemson.
Okay. Walter, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions for you. Appreciate the presentation today.
Thanks. It's Warren, by the way.
Sorry, Warren. Excuse my language. Okay. Jason Berggraf will be our next delegate. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you
Whenever
very
you're
much,
ready.
Chair.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the Joint Committee. I'm pleased to speak on behalf of the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association on the city's updated growth projections. Our written submission includes expert analysis from Mike Moffat, Darrell Kelleher, and Will Dunning, but I'll focus my remarks on the high-level aspects of the report and GOBA's key concerns, but as always, I'm happy to answer any questions. GOBA is pleased that the Ministry of Finance population numbers has been used as the basis for the projections, but as we detail in our submission, there are additional factors that could increase growth not included in the Ministry's numbers and therefore have not been contemplated within the report. First, Ottawa has a pre-existing housing shortage. In 2021, this deficit was estimated to be 20,000 units. Updated estimates now put that deficit at just over 40,000. Our second point of concern is estimating intra-provincial migration figures and subsequently the demand for low-rise housing in Ottawa. When we look at housing supply across the province, the severe shortage of three-bedroom units in the GTA is not accurately captured, and the ministry is overestimating future population growth in the GTA. This research is underpinned, this research underpinning this was included in our submission by the Missing Middle Initiative, and Dr. Moffat explains that this phenomenon of drive until you qualify at a regional level, where families who cannot afford to live in the GTA will move to other regions like Ottawa, are seeking the kind of housing they're after at a price point they can afford. This leads into the necessity of ensuring the right housing mix types that are planned for. In order for Ottawa to accommodate its population growth, anticipated increased demand from outside the region, and addressing our existing housing shortage, we need to look at the kinds of units that are planned on being built. There's a clear market preference for three-bedroom, ground-oriented dwellings, and ensuring we have the right mix of low-rise housing is just as important as how many starts we achieve in any given year. Hempson's report assumes that there will be significant growth in low-rise multifamily and additional residential units and a fundamental shift away from single detached and semi-homes. And while it's easier than ever to construct an ARU on a property, the assumptions of their growth are not supported by the kind of construction activity that is occurring. And most of the ARUs in the city are going to be closer to basement apartments, not the kind of freestanding buildings on existing properties that are contemplated, nor are there three bedrooms that most families are seeking. This includes new ARUs realized through renovation of existing homes, as well as those purpose-built into newly constructed single-detached homes. If one discounts additional demand from the pre-existing housing shortage and discounts intra-provincial migration, projections for demand of ground-oriented units for 2021 to 2051 for the growth forecast report are relatively in line with the estimates calculated by MMI. But when pre-existing housing shortage and interprovincial migration is added, even more residential units are required, and they're going to be predominantly single detached. Council, through the Housing Acceleration Plan, supported an ambitious plan to say yes to housing. If we're not planning accurately for families and the types of housing they want to live in, all we're doing is planning for future constricted housing supply down the road, which in turn will only contribute to upward pressure to the housing affordability crisis. GOBA is concerned that while ground-oriented, presumptions behind the housing mix will not satisfy those looking for family-friendly, appropriately sized housing, and therefore there's an underestimation in the demand for single detached homes. If that's the case, the number of families that leave Ottawa in search of the housing they desire at a price they can afford will increase. This means families will live outside of Ottawa, but many will continue to commute into Ottawa for work and to use its services. The answer to this is keeping the household propensities consistent through to 2051 as per the projection methodology guidelines in place currently. Prudent planning will allow the right housing mix and will ultimately relieve pressure on affordability as we move forward and our population grows. Thanks very much, and again, happy to answer any questions.
Very succinct. Thank you very much, Jason. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Jason. As always, the challenge I always have is that, we all know that you rightly so represent all the developers, right? So it's not like you'd come here and tell us that we should be building less and that's not a thing, right? But I was surprised, you did give us some stats because, you think about confirmation bias that you might only look for ways that the population may go up, but you actually looked at the possibility that people might leave Ottawa and go and live in Almont, where developers are also building houses too that they're happy about. Are there any other reasons why you think the population may go down? Did you look for any of that?
No, the biggest piece is definitely going to be the lack of accommodation of housing that people can afford within the city boundaries will push them out to outer communities, Almont, Empire, Carleton Place, what have you.
Did you quantify that at all?
Not in the report, but there's data of how much migration is out. It's like Carleton Place, and well, I don't want to necessarily get into the details, but Carleton Place, say, has grown 20% from 2016 to 2021, and then is growing 30% from 2021 to today. So when you're seeing that kind of expansive growth in our satellite communities, that means people are kind of coming into the region and not finding what they need or want or can afford here within the city.
Yeah, and I hear you, and they're using our services. I mean, we talk about that a lot. But I mean, I just would like a little bit more information about why the possibilities might be that the population goes down as well, so we have everything. But at least you've got a couple of examples, so thank you.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
I guess something I struggle with is there's a lot of other cities where families live quite happily in taller buildings because there tends to be bigger apartments available, and it becomes a fairly common lifestyle choice. I will tell you straight up, I would very happily live in a high rise with my family if there was an apartment that met our needs, right? And some of the older buildings do. There's people who have knocked them together, but for the most part, we have too big developers to build family-sized apartments in Centertown. I'll tell you, I hear from my residents, they would love to stay downtown, but the kind of housing they're looking for isn't available. And that isn't necessarily ground-oriented. It just needs to accommodate a growing family. Do you have any insight on anything else we can be doing as a city to encourage bigger family size units in some of these high density developments? Because every time I talk to someone from the development industry, I feel like they consistently underestimate the demand. And they say it's not worth it, it's too expensive to build, and it's just going to be someone and their roommates. It isn't going to be a family. But the buildings that do have those apartments in them have families, and many of us would like to stay. I think there's just a bit of a flight issue happening, not necessarily because grand-oriented is the only way to raise a family, but because the rental or condo options in some of these taller buildings are just not giving people any wiggle room.
I'd be happy to go back and see what kind of inducements would be. What I can, for larger apartments, what I can say is in virtually every building that I'm told about, where the biggest apartments go last, because of course price per square foot of construction is equal no matter what square foot you're talking about in the building. So if a unit is 12,000 square feet, right, like it's going to be more expensive than the smaller ones. So if and again, I'm happy to kind of take it back and ask, how do we what can equalize that or make those larger apartments cheaper? I'm happy to do that, but it's because of the cost of providing a bigger apartment is of course the issue coming forward. So, and it's still, yes, there's going to be a portion of people, I don't know what that number is, who are going to be quite happy living that way or raising a family in a larger apartment. But on the predominant side, most people are going to say, if I'm spending close to $1 million for something, a large apartment and or even a townhome or a single family home somewhere else, right now the market is choosing the single family home or something more grand oriented.
Yeah, I would just argue that the market is not actually providing people a choice, because it sort of becomes one or the other. And I've visited a lot of the new developments in my ward, and like even a 2-bedroom is like, the bedroom is like an envelope for the bed with a nook off of it. Like even the concept of what 2-bedroom is, it used to be 1,200 square feet. Now it's like 600. It's really, they really, really are small. I understand that the cost of construction has gone up. Has GOBA or the development industry done any research into the kind of amenities that might tempt families to live in an apartment other than just size? Because again, this is common. I had a resident I door knocked in Brazil, and she was pregnant and was like, "I am so sad. I need to leave Centertown." She's like, "I'm from Brazil. It's normal for families to live in apartment buildings. It's normal in Sweden. It's normal in Oslo. It's normal in Tokyo." Like, what is stopping us in Ottawa? And so my question is, you say yes, the predominant preference is a grand oriented space, but I would argue that what people are looking for just may not exist right now. So I'm just wondering if GOBA would consider doing some work, because I think those apartments would be sellable if the right incentives were there, right? What if there was childcare right in your building? What if there was a pool? What if there was a playroom for kids? Like there's lots of Toronto buildings that do this too.
I don't have that research, but I am happy to look into it for sure.
For sure. I mean, I just think, I understand the argument that you're making, but it ultimately supports more sprawl if we say the only way for a family to live is in a ground-oriented unit, because we can't build 400,000 ground-oriented units if that's what our growth projections are in the next 10 years. Not all of those households will be families, but, there are many of us that would love to stay in our community, and we'd be happy to do so in a multi-unit building if it was the right one. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Kitts?
Thank you, Chair. Jason, the last couple appearances you've had before the committee have been in the context of us trying to accelerate housing through various policies. And I always have the same question for you. Is what we're doing going to encourage infill development in urban areas? And you've said yes. And, I thought we were all kind of rowing in the same direction in terms of directing growth to transit-oriented development. And today I'm hearing you say, but what about Greenfield? So I feel like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. So I'd like you to square that circle for me.
Yeah, no, they're not, but they're not mutually exclusive. And the reality is the increase in growth we're talking about from 400,000 people to 680,000 people, 1.7 million by 2051, is going to need more types of housing, and more housing rather, and every type of housing that there is. As I've said kind of here many times, it requires both existing neighborhoods to become more denser. It requires more apartments around LRT stations, and it's going to require more new communities, in suburban areas. That relationship really doesn't change. It's just the scale of all of these things. And my point for this particular piece is the fundamental numbers of ground-oriented versus apartments and intensification is not changing. It's just the mix of that Hempson is pointing to of what can be accommodated on the ground-oriented front is in dispute. But the actual thrust of we need all three avenues of housing growth to accommodate our growing population is no different than before.
But you still agree that the recent policy changes we've made are encouraging that type of infill development?
Yes, no, absolutely. Okay. That this does not change that. No.
Okay, because the good land, the easy land is taken in terms of urban expansion. We are now bumping up against agricultural land that's unserviced, land that does not have infrastructure capacity. So I'm deeply concerned about that, but I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Carr.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. Thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question. One thing I do hear from people is I do hear that they want those different types. They want semi-detached, they want stacked townhomes, they want row townhomes. I've got my adult children home with me presently, as well as another adult child that doesn't belong to me, but I can see myself wanting to be in my neighborhood in a different form of housing in the next few years. But the one thing that I hear is that people want to own these types of housing. And that's what I really struggle with, is that if you want to own these types of housing, you have to go to the suburbs where it's cheaper. And so that is what is driving a lot of people out, is that there's not a lot of these types of housing to purchase, because what is being built is apartment, it's rentals only. And we see that when we look at the statistics for the condo market. I think we probably, the condo market is basically not even a market in Ottawa. It simply doesn't exist. There's no options for people to purchase. And so, there's lots of indications that, things that we need to do to incentivize affordable home ownership is changing the zoning, developing plans such as the Housing Accelerator plan that was recently approved. But yet, what I don't understand is how can the development industry help us move towards having these options to purchase when, profit is a big motivator here? Because I think that's a lot of the reason why we're seeing sprawl having to be built, is because people want to put their capital, they do want to invest in an affordable home, and nobody talks about it. Even when we talk about affordable housing, it's always rental. So I just am interested in hearing your perspective on that.
Thank you. I would agree that the condo market is very minuscule in Ottawa. I think it's maybe 10%. And fundamentally, that's kind of cultural, right? It's just not been a market that has developed or a housing typology that's been found to be desirable here in Ottawa. People come to Ottawa over Toronto or over Montreal because it has more predominantly low-rise housing, and because they want that lifestyle that's associated with that sort of thing. And condo is just not in demand here. So projects that have been put out to market don't get the kind of reception one hopes, and they get converted to rentals. And the increase in rental markets over the past year, or sorry, rental units over the past year and so, are really a fundamental reaction to housing affordability, and that's the only thing people can kind of get into right now. Ottawa has like 11,000 rental units coming on stream in the next 2 years. So it's yourself and you know, it's a bit of a cultural thing. In reality, like I think I've said it around the table before, is where I'm from in St. John's, Mount Pearl, Newfoundland, basement apartments are ubiquitous. Like it's usually for everyone's first type of housing that they move out of their parents' house and then live in a basement apartment, and find a partner and move on. But that's a cultural thing, right? It's not like that here, and they're just regional variations on that type of market demand.
So do you think in terms of increasing the supply that will motivate developers to build more housing for purchase, or will profit always determine the fact that it will just be rental?
What will determine what gets built is what people come to the showroom to buy, and what they indicate that they want the purchase of. Like condo townhomes have gotten a bigger portion of the market over even just in the past 18 months, right? It's grown from like I think 1% to like 4 or 5%. So it's clear that people are willing to get into that type of home ownership. But again, it's what people come to the door to demand.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Good to see you. Well, Marty kind of stole some of my questions, but I was thinking along the same line of, purchase versus rental. I know people that live in Ottawa community housing who dream of owning a home one day. Seems like so far away for many people, even those making a good income, but that's what they want. And what they're being offered, and our transit-oriented development that we're promoting, almost all of it is rental. And greenfield tends to be what you were talking about, is being on the ground floor, but it's for purchase, and people want to purchase something. I am hoping, and I hope you'll agree with me, that with the intensification that we're putting out there, that we'll see that missing middle. So it's smaller chunks. It's not big buildings. It's here and there, but we can still have it, and as they could be condos of maybe only 4 units. Maybe you were talking about the growth of townhouses. I think that's a big growth, because from what I'm hearing from families, in my ward, they desperately want to live here. They can't afford it, but they desperately want to live in these areas because they're established, because they've got schools and playgrounds and all the stuff that and transit, of course. But at the moment, it's predominantly single family home, but slowly there's opportunities, but they want to purchase. And that, I think it's possible, and that doesn't seem to be happening. It seems to be focused on rental because somebody wants to use it as an investment. But I hope that will be a growth. I don't know what you think of that, but I see it in Montreal. Montreal, it's not unusual to see, buildings that are, the second floor of a 3-story building is a condo that's for rent, and it's just that, small building. I'd like to see more opportunities like that for families, because families don't necessarily want to live in a single family home, as has been pointed out. It's culturally around the world, but we're not given that opportunity. And it's about having a decent sized unit. So, what do you think? Is that possible? Are developers willing to build those?
Well, in terms of the market, actually, townhomes have been the predominant low-rise type of housing for, gosh, at least certainly I think almost all the time I've been at GOBA, so well over 5 years, maybe the entire time. But like in terms of the breakout, townhomes is the majority of what low-rise that gets built. On the rental side, I think it's a bit. It's a reflective of the market being cyclical, and there's been such a deficit in housing construction, or sorry, rental construction over the past number of years, that we're seeing a lot of rental come on stream now in response to a lack of it, for a number of years previous. Now, because of course there's such a dearth of rentals coming on stream, we're probably going to see that go down a bit. Like the number of construction is always going to be much more volatile in that kind of multi-unit rental situation. So I would always caution to not look at construction activity in a single year and presuppose that that's sort of how things are going or will go forward, moving forward. But so yeah, the market is adjusting. The singles have definitely gone down from over 50% to under close to 40, especially in terms of sales. So that again, and the condo towns are also mixing in. So the types of sales we're seeing over the past number of years is that mix is definitely changing.
Yeah, it's based on what they can afford, and unfortunately, I think it's misleading that the market for rental is growing. It's because they can't afford. If they could afford, they wouldn't be in that rental market. And I think that more options should be put out there, not just townhouses, but why not, to have like 3-story buildings that are condos. It doesn't necessarily have to be a townhouse. So, but these exist in other communities, other cities. But we just haven't gone there. So I'm hoping those kind of ideas. Anyway, it's about having families in areas where the resources are there. We've got established communities, and there's just so much potential for them. So I hope that is looked at.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Jason, always good to have you here. So I am fully on board with making sure that we make decisions that meet the needs of a growing number of young families in Ottawa. But I also recognize that we have an aging population. I think the report makes reference to an aging population, and that aging population's housing needs are gonna shift too. So I share your position that we need to meet that housing demand, that there is a demand for home ownership, and that what a lot of those young families are going to be wanting is single family homes. However, of course, the definition or the understanding of what a single family home is changing. The report makes that clear. As our aging population grows, my understanding is once you reach a certain age, we're going to have a lot of overhoused seniors. They're going to look for other opportunities, likely towards purpose-built rentals or other forms. They will be vacating those properties. And if we have, therefore, an aging population that is going to be reaching that age soon, where they're going to be likely vacating their properties, that frees up a lot of possible units for home ownership. Could that significant, and I'm not saying that's going to wipe away all of our demand, but could you not see that Ottawa's aging population, which is a large demographic, is going to be getting to the point where they need to vacate their single family homes? There's going to be a transfer of ownership. And that seismic shift, free up or meet some of the demand that we're talking about here?
So unfortunately not, but it's because the assumption, again, what I've been watching so far, the assumption of having people age in place or leave their family homes, people are not leaving. Right as of today, there are plenty of seniors who are in single family homes, and they have fundamentally decided in the aggregate that they are going to stay in those homes. They like the neighborhood, they like their neighbors, any number of reasons, and you can't criticize any one individual. But in the aggregate, for sure, they're taking up a lot more housing than they actually need. But the scenario you're describing is something that planning has kind of considered for a number of decades now of, oh, people will age, empty nesters, what have you, they'll age, they'll fill in into the core of the community because they'll be closer to doctors and other amenities and everything else. But that assumption just hasn't proven out.
It
People
hasn't
have
proven
kind of
out.
stayed in their
Sorry.
housing.
Of course, it hasn't proven out yet because, as other colleagues have said, we haven't exactly provided the diversity of options for those seniors to move into. But even with the passing of the new zoning bylaw and all of the modifications to housing that we will see on any single plot of land, whether that be increasing the number of units available or allowing for ARUs, could you not foresee that if, as you said, seniors quite likely often, if they don't necessarily want to stay in that house, they want to stay in that community, and I understand that. Could you not see that with the kind of housing reform that the new zoning bylaw has put in place, that those options, if they haven't presented themselves in the past 5 years, they will present themselves in the next 15, 25 years?
There certainly will be more options.
Thank you.
How large of a piece that is and whether it's significant enough, I'm not sure yet.
But whatever piece that might be, that could very reasonably take away demand from Greenfield. Math being math.
Of the existing single families, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation today. And thanks for reflecting the market realities. I think that's what it really is about. Would it be a fair assessment to say the faster we get approvals and flood the market, this will only help with our housing crisis situation right now?
Yeah, bringing housing online just simply takes time, right? And especially bringing parcels of land takes time. Parcels of land that were approved back in the 2022 OP, many still aren't. It's not like there are houses being built and sold on them now. Like a lot are still very much in the process of being approved and registered and what have you. So it's those pieces it takes a long time. So when we're talking about the decisions we make today, it's housing options a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road for right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do see a topology of different types, the ones that make sense from a market point of view, because I don't think anyone's in the business of building stuff for free unless it's on the government dime, and that is a whole separate subsection. I just approved a whole bunch of towers in my area for seniors. Clearly there's a market for it. We're talking about this downtown building larger apartments. I would love to see that too, but the frank discussion that's taken place here today, the reality is it's hard to keep people in those larger downtown apartments, it sounds like. Is there a real solution to that aside from the market or government intervention and funding stuff like that separately?
It would have to be funding separately, paying for DCs or something like that to reduce that cost, to make those units marketable or to a price point that would actually bring people in. I think one of the things that we deal with language about projections like this is often, you're using words like choice or preference, when sometimes it's subtle, right? Like people settle for a townhome versus what they might actually desire, or they can't make anything else work, right? We're always big fans of trying to provide as much different types of housing as possible across the city, but we also have to reflect what the market demands.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. I'm not seeing any other questions for you, Jason. Thank you. So we'll move on to our next delegate, which is Dave Coyle from the Riverside Park Community Association.
Welcome, Mr. Coyle. You will have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and committee members. I'm from Riverside Park in River Ward, and we border on 8 wards. We have 5 federal district borders, and we have 5 provincial borders. So looking forward to becoming a complete community and across the city. We have a very good potential for a 15-minute community, and the middle 2 new minor corridors with commercial mixed zoning, which will affect our logistical system within the community. Next slide, please. Referencing the Hansen report, we looked at the projection for households, and at the bottom, it projected 170%. It has a zero start housing trend in 2026. So zero start is kind of like getting on a scooter and hitting the button and still standing on the curb, starting a nuclear reactor, or looking at the inclusionary zoning bylaw, which is a zero start scenario. The Hansen curve to grow 170% by 2051. And I do agree with Warren, do we feel lucky? Next slide, please. We have worked with the city as a community for the last 5 years or more, and have come up with 2 chromosomes of the official plan and zoning. And in this DNA is a new local-based logistics supply chain of our talent to create new export products. This is not referred to in the Hansen report. Next slide, please. River Ward, with its current spot amendments, which seem to go under the radar, and with the new as of rights, our projection for the area will be 201% potential to the 170. That's 30% over what the projection is. This is a new mix of active, rapid transit orientated, vertical, and factory built with commercial mixed. Green space for us is implicit to this intensification, both socially and environmentally. This is not referred to in the Hansen report. In this projection, no green space has been consumed, but actually recovered within the Confederation Heights. We have more green space there. Granted, we don't have roundabouts, and we don't have necessarily any parking. Boom Alto LRT, which I would call the new rapid transit, provides us a hub that we can travel internationally or probably to Montreal faster than we can go to Orleans. And this advantage of Riverside Park is great on its effect of migration. And we are looking forward to the Brockington motion. Next slide. What we're dealing with is that on the left-hand side, we have a young adult, which is now less than the older adult cohorts, and a box of migration that usually disappears. This is not really mentioned in any detail. Came up in the adult workshop, and the constable for fraud, on the next slide, please, shows that this older adult cohort, $8 trillion of equity sits, whereas in the younger adult, virtually none. And that's inequity that we would like to fix. This is, ironically, if you look at the NEI, the Neighborhood Equity Index, next slide, please. We have several high red zones, which, next slide, please,
Dave, can I ask you to wrap up your time?
Correlates to youth. So we are looking to input to the process of how household growth formation occurs and the utilization of our new zoning within our new DNA from the OP. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I don't see any hands up, so thank you very much for delegating today. Which will bring us to our final delegation, Paul Johannes with the Green Space Alliance, who is online.
Thank you, Chair Leeper. I'm here today on behalf of the Green Space Alliance, so the positions that I'll be bringing forward are restricted to our organization. However, you might know I'm also chair of the Federation of Citizens Associations, and I can confirm that Warren was indeed speaking on behalf of the entire federation and will be in fact reporting on this at our general meeting this evening. So next, before we get to the next slide, well, no, that's okay, fine. From the Green Space Alliance perspective, from an environmental perspective, I mean, perhaps our history in terms of official plan. We are definitely proponents of more and better densification. We think we need to build more compact, more connected, at the same time, more green. And doing so by sort of gentle intensification across the city to create 15-minute neighborhoods. So very much behind the official plan. The counterpart is that we hope by doing that, we avoid the need to expand the urban boundary. And so that's going to be part, that's where we come from. So next slide. The population projections themselves, they're the Ministry of Finance projections. They're done in a very proper, standard methodological way. And it all comes down really that the growth in Ottawa is all attributable to international in-migration. And so, and the methodology note that we get from the report, not from this report, but from the ministry's report, is that projected immigration shares for each census division are based on the trends observed in the distribution of immigrants by census division over the recent past. And then these shares evolve throughout the projection period following established trends. But really, what does that mean? That's a lot of words, but what does it actually mean? Like, for example, according to Statistics Canada data, 47,415 immigrants settled in Ottawa between 2016 and 2021. That represented 18% of the total immigrant population in Ottawa. This is an indicator that's available for every census, at least back to 2001. Is this the trend observed? Is this what they're talking about in this description of how the data was derived? And if it is, how was it extended into the future? And if it's not, like, what indicator was used? This is the single real factor that our entire growth is attributable to that. It seems to me we should have better information, more complete information about specifically how it was derived and applied, and so that we can assess its validity for our own Ottawa context. So the action out of this would be to get back to the ministry to ask more details about specifically how it got done and document that and make that available so that we understand where that number comes from. Next slide, please. So that first part, population, that's all the ministry. We have to go with their projections. This next two parts, household counts and housing propensity, that's pretty much totally within the municipality's decision-making frame. You could go with pretty much anything here that makes sense. So here we're looking at household formation. We heard from the consultant and others about household formation. What we see is a long-term secular decline of household formation in young adult groups, and it's been going on for decades. Really, we could see the lines. Each one of these, this is each an age group in a youth category, and it goes down, down, down. So there's fewer people leaving, home in a sense to create new households all the time through till 2021, 2026. But this forecast also sees a turnaround, though, in 2031. Something happens in 2031 where that curve stops going down and starts coming back up. So a reversal of a very long-standing trend. And it's mostly attributable in the report to improved housing affordability. But housing affordability isn't the only factor in play here. There's change in social norms, there's longer education period for youth, there's student debt, there's youth unemployment. I went on here, there's existential dread, climate change, there's doom scrolling, there's lots going on for people to say, oh no, I'm not starting a family, I'm not moving out. And
Paul,
so
you are out of time. If I could just ask you to wrap up, please.
Okay. So basically, we're on. If I just flip through the slides quickly.
Sorry, Paul. Could I ask you to wrap up quickly, please?
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So basically there is option here for re-examination, or at least requiring alternative scenarios, alternative assumptions to be tested and looked at to make sure that we are not overbuilding, that we are not creating situations where, even though this is going to be revised in 5 years, if, for example, we decide on urban expansion as a basis of these numbers, that expansion can't be drawn back. There are things that can't be changed. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johannes. I don't see any hands up, so thank you very much for the presentation today. So that leads us into questions of staff and the city's consultants. I'll take a look for hands up. No questions? Councillor Dudas.
Sorry, I had too many windows open. Thank you. I do have a couple of questions in respect to the numbers. Again, so I was curious as to the timing of this information. Council just approved the updated zoning bylaws. I think it was like about 2 weeks ago or something of that sort. Is there a reason why this information was not available previously to help us with that decision making? Is there any indications that this information will change anything in the bylaw that we have already approved?
So, Chair, the zoning bylaw represents more of a potential in terms of permission, and it provides a lot more flexibility, particularly oriented to the missing middle. Instead of zoning back in the day, R1 would be single family attached and that's it, and so on and so forth. So zoning bylaw does away with that. And it really tries to maximize the potential permissions. The growth projections, however, are not about what would be permitted. It's more about the growth that we expect and the type of the demand for that type of growth for what the zoning bylaw would permit in the future.
Okay. When we speak about population growth, we're usually thinking about housing. But with housing comes the need for infrastructure. And I was just curious as to how that is being factored into this decision making, in particular, the growth management strategy update that you're going to be bringing to council next year.
So, Chair, the process that we'll be looking at is after decisions are made on the growth management strategy and an official plan amendment is ultimately adopted in 2027 and approved by the province, we would then look at updating the transportation master plan, infrastructure master plan, and the climate change master plan for that approved growth and how that growth would be allocated through the growth management strategy.
Okay. And then I was also curious. So we know that growth projections for the communities surrounding Ottawa outside of our boundaries are booming. I'll give you the example of Clarence Rockland. That has had huge implications for infrastructure in New Orleans and east end of our city because they're seeing a huge skyrocket of housing demand. Has that been factored into the projections that we're seeing right now? How will staff interweave that with what we're planning for what's to come for us in terms of our planning decisions?
So, Chair, that's captured under in the Hempson report, talks about growth and there's different migration streams. So there's been a lot of discussion today on the immigration stream. There's a couple of other streams, one called the interprovincial, so that those are moving to Ontario and those moving out of Ontario to other provinces. And there's another migration stream called intra-provincial, so movement within the province. So that includes people moving from Ottawa to other areas within Ontario, including Clarence Rockland, North Dundas, Kemptville, Kingston, etc.
Okay. Chair, through you, the population growth numbers before us today are incredibly impactful and will shape Ottawa for generations. To put this into perspective, it's the equivalent of adding the population of Halifax or Quebec City into Ottawa. In a ward like Orleans West Innis, there's no more land to expand into. Growth will come through infill, and that does not necessarily mean high rises only at LRT stations. It means more density on quiet residential streets. It means basement suites, garden suites, and multiplexes. Neighborhoods across Ottawa will see more people, more homes, more activity. On one hand, that's not surprising. Ottawa is a city where people want to live and raise their families, and that is a great thing. But on the other hand, growth at the scale means the city must be ready. In this term, we updated the zoning bylaw and moved forward with the housing action plan because we need more housing not only for today, but for the next decade, for the next 20 years and forward. But we also need the same urgency when it comes to transportation and the infrastructure surrounding that. Adding tens of thousands of people puts enormous pressure on already strained infrastructure. And for years, residents have been stuck in gridlock. In Orleans, 3 major arteries serve more than 150,000 residents, plus commuters from further east as they come through our community. If Orleans absorbs another 40 to 60,000 residents, even with the new LRT extension, a system that is struggling today will be overwhelmed tomorrow. And this is not just an Orleans issue. As our major artery, the 417 cannot be widened, yet it carries most of our commuters and most of the regional traffic that simply passes through our city. If the province expects Ottawa to grow to 1.7 million people, then they need to help us move those people. Our roads, our transit systems, and our active transportation networks must be able to support both the residents who live here today and the residents who are going to arrive in the decades ahead. The Ottawa-Ontario deal is a good start. Uploading the 174 and the LRT would represent major improvements for our city and free up significant municipal resources for essential services. But as our core urban areas and our suburbs grow denser, we need solutions that help people move across the city quickly and safely. One solution is for the province to commit to a ring road, a new 400 series highway connecting Ottawa's east, south, and west. A new highway would take unnecessary traffic out of the core, redirect heavy trucks off of rural village roads, and give residents across the city a way to move efficiently. This is not a replacement for transit investment. It is what we need in addition to transit. If Ottawa is going to welcome another 500,000 people, we need both. These projections make one thing clear: Ottawa cannot absorb 500,000 new residents without major infrastructure investment. And as our city grows, our transportation systems must grow with it, not just scramble to catch up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dudas. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a bunch of questions, comments. I'm not sure if I'll get to them all, but I know I can always come back to council. I do have, and I've already kind of expressed them, concerns about the planning risks that come with adopting these projections as they are now. And I want to be clear, I am not at all disputing the fact that Ottawa is going to be growing rapidly. And I do understand that the Hempson projections are compliant with the provincial policy statement. My concern, and the concern that I heard from several delegates, is advancing based on a single number rather than getting a range of scenarios that could dramatically alter the landscape higher or lower. And that, for me, is a concern about planning risk, because the weight our decision carries today over decisions that we make on our growth management strategy. So the staff report describes today's decision as step 1 in a 3-step process. Staff have also stated that we will have opportunities to update our official plan every 5 years, which can review growth projections. But in the legal implications section of this report, legal services, they advise very clearly that interim conclusions reached through this process can carry significant weight, and that final decisions are expected to build upon earlier determinations, the determinations that we will be making here today by adopting these projections as step one. And so even if today is not a boundary decision, even if today is not a land use decision, neither is it a neutral step nor a step without consequences. So I do have a bunch of questions for different departments. I'll start with legal. So as I mentioned, staff propose this is step one. Step two comes in April. Step three comes in 2027. The specific language that legal puts in the report is significant weight is given to the interim conclusions reached through the process, and it is expected that the final decisions made by council at the culmination of the growth management review will build upon the determinations made through the process. So based on that, how reversible might today's adoption be once step two work begins to rely on it?
So, Chair, as new information comes forward based on additional analysis that will occur following Council's recommendation, then that information helps lead to a future conclusion on the ultimate growth plan, which of course my colleagues can speak to. If new information comes forward between today and future Council decisions, whether that's the one in April or the one in 2027, that significantly deviates from what we are looking at today, then staff will certainly review and provide a recommendation for any adjustments that are required, if any adjustments are required. So today is one step to move forward with the analysis, and further analysis, direction, explanation, and such will come forward as we continue through the process.
Of course, I know that today is just one step, but even in legal's own words, significant weight is given to the interim conclusions. Today is an interim conclusion, isn't it?
I would agree that today is an interim conclusion, and this, I would look at it more as a building block type analysis of, you know, we can't kind of come out of left field, and we're making those steps to our ultimate council's ultimate conclusion in 2027.
Thank you. My next question, still with legal. So as delegates have made clear, right now we are in the process of adopting a single path reference. No variations, no scenario analysis other than the single path reference right now. If we adopt these recommendations in the single state, does the absence, or would the absence of any variation or the absence of any scenario analysis at this stage, could that increase legal or procedural risk down the road if later on land use or settlement area decisions are challenged? Could they look back at us adopting this as step one and point to that as an issue in their defense?
Chair, at this time, there is no legal requirement to analyze a variety of scenarios prior to council moving forward with this process. I think it would be appropriate for staff to comment on this direction they are recommending versus multiple different scenarios as to kind of why they've chosen to go that way. But at this time, legal has no concerns with the direction staff is taking.
All right, thank you. I will have questions for staff. I do have some questions for Hemson, if I may. So I appreciate that you made reference to figure 3 in your presentation, and if my colleagues hadn't paid as much attention over the past few days to figure 3 as I have, basically, so figure 3 shows a brown bar where there's a long period of relatively stable it's on page 12, relatively stable historical population growth. There's a green line which represents, actual growth, and you see a historical and unprecedented spike in growth between 2021 and 2024. And then your forecast line, the blue line, it shows a forecast moving forward to 2051, which does appear to reflect that spike. So looking at figure 3, am I to understand that the unusually high, the historically unprecedented population growth experienced between 2021 and 2024, did that play a significant role in shaping the long-term growth trajectory shown to 2051?
Yes, okay. Well, thank you for that question. The historic growth, if you look at it in terms of growth rates from 2001 to 24, is a compound annual growth rate of about just under 1.5% over that time period, and it's about 1.6% going forward in the next 25 years. So really, on a growth rate basis, it's very similar. It's just a little I'm sorry, I said that in reverse. It's a little less going forward than it was in the past. Pardon me, but it's but because Ottawa is a much larger place, you end up with a higher absolute growth, is what you see there. But none of this is terribly influenced by the recent spike in growth. It influences it because it's there in the base. I mean, it has occurred, and so it is there, but it doesn't unduly influence the going forward because the international migration, which is a lot of what that's about, is now changed with the new federal policies and that kind of thing.
Okay,
so
thank you. So do the projections that you've got right now, the projection of 2051, do they take into account, because I'm not sure if I understood, do those current projections take into account the new significantly lower immigration targets that were set by the federal government last November, which set targets for 2026, 2027, 2028? Because those targets are lower.
This was produced before that by the Ministry of Finance. Yes. It does take account of the November 2024 immigration announcement, and the 2025 one is consistent with that. It just adds an extra year.
And so if your projections are current up until the November 2024 setting of targets, if you are, as I understand it, going back to do work for step 2, do you see an opportunity, and based on what legal said, that there's always an opportunity to revisit, do you see an opportunity when you do your work for step 2 to revisit that analysis with the far more recent and far more different numbers set in November 2025? Can you revisit your model based on that?
Well, the numbers are the same actually going forward as in what's in these projections and the 2025 announcement and the November 25 announcement. It is perfectly consistent with them both because they didn't change much in the November announcement. They just had an extra year at the same rate from the 2024 one. And yeah, I mean, there's always an opportunity to relook. I mean, we don't generally reconsider a whole 25 years of growth by one data point adding to it. But if something extraordinary happens, then yes, of course you do.
Councillor, that's your time.
Thank you. I'll get back on.
We'll
Thank you.
move to Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are kind of various here. The first one, though, is when we were listening to the delegate Warren, he was indicating that there's risk that comes with not taking into consideration a number of things, right? The report lists at least 4 or 5 things that are not taken into consideration when we see these numbers. But he asked, do we understand fully the risk of not including those things into our assumptions? Is that a possibility that we get those numbers? What is the risk associated with not having all kinds of different things included in these assumptions?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, I think we would all acknowledge that whenever you're forecasting 25 years into the future, there's an inherent risk in all of that. And the risk increases the further you go out. And there's various ways of mitigating risk. One of the options put forward today is to look at scenario testing. There has been scenario testing that's done by the Ministry of Finance in its projection work. They do that on an Ontario-wide basis. So we have used the reference scenario for the city's purposes in our report, but that's not to say that analysis of different scenarios hasn't been done before the stage that we're at right now. Other ways to mitigate risk are some of the things that Royce has mentioned and others, and that is that, just because the city adopts a forecast doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. And there's all sorts of growth management work that the city needs to do in order to, make sure it plays out. And there are controls and checks and balances that the city has to, adjust the speed of growth and how it plays out, not least with your phasing plans and your land use plans and your infrastructure servicing plans. So there are all sorts of gates that still need to be cleared before the growth can be realized that you still have control over.
Okay, so I'm hearing you think we've got enough mitigation strategies in place that we don't need to worry too much. Okay, another question I have is, we heard from Royce the different plans that would be impacted by this. I didn't hear the older adult plan. I know it's not like a master plan, but it is a significant plan that we have as a city. And these types of numbers for our growing senior population, I think, are important and impactful to that plan. I'm wondering if there's a comment on how these numbers might impact it.
So, Chair, if adopted by council, it would inform sort of the base information of, not only the number of seniors for that plan to consider, but the various age groups and the different aspects we would have to plan for those age groups. So it would provide that base information for that plan to go forward.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the things I think we're all noticing, and certainly other municipalities are talking about this a lot, is that there's sort of a gradual erosion of municipal powers under our current provincial government. I think they believe that that's for a good reason, but you see it whether it's started with the strong mayor powers or now the taking down the speed cameras. But I'm wondering if this isn't just another example of that. I'm wondering if staff have a comment on what we're doing here and whether it really matters or makes any difference given what we're seeing right now with generally municipalities having less and less control over what they're able to do and decide for themselves.
So, Chair, this was part of that framework that Joint Committee considered back in October 2024. And part of that was that perception that there's new growth that the current official plan had not planned for. And in order to try to plan for that growth, we would undertake this exercise so that we would have the right options in place to provide all the housing that's been discussed here today.
Huh. Okay. And I guess I just want to make a comment that what Councillor Dudas has said about infrastructure not keeping up with some of these projections, I guess I would like to see as a councillor some indication that we really truly are taking into consideration in terms of the planning we are seeing for infrastructure that would support this growth, because certainly in the suburbs, we are not seeing it. And I could give you many examples in Canada North where it's actually dangerous, actually life-threatening that we are not taking these types of growth numbers and then saying, as a result, we need to invest in the infrastructure that will allow this type of growth. So I make that comment as my closing comment, but I don't know. I didn't get and I know it's hard to ask staff for a political answer, but I don't feel when we do these types of exercises, it really helps us in the political sense writ large, and but maybe helps us for some planning decisions because we can go so slowly that we can accommodate all the risk. Anyway, that's my slightly negative perspective at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. To pick right back up from that slightly negative perspective, it's good to have the right numbers, but this report gives me a lot of anxiety because I think we've grossly outgrown our infrastructure today. I think there's been a storm brewing for a long time, and the eye is almost upon us. So to staff, can you explain, is there a material consequence to have projected these numbers incorrectly? Like, is there anything we would have done differently had we had these numbers in our last OP update that is now a concern?
So, Chair, that would just change sort of the timing and the phasing of how we would accommodate that growth. If we think about just the 5-year increments, that gives us abilities to look at that growth as it goes forward and build on the backbone our infrastructure master plan, for example, and how to do that incrementally, as opposed to trying to do that all at once at one point in time. So if we had these numbers, it would have been just a larger scope of trying to accommodate the growth. What we've seen, compared to that, we've had 2 rounds, let's say over 5 years, and just doing that more incrementally.
Okay, but now we're going to need to make that sort of big jump in these next updates.
That's correct. So the updates to the IMP and TMP would have to consider what projects would be required to accommodate that growth.
Yeah, that's I think the concern. I am feeling like the dog ate our homework a little bit because sort of all of our policies to date have been built around those numbers. So, question for Hempson. I found it interesting that the single detached projection shoots back up in 2031. So you see a big spike in apartments in 2021 and 2031, and then it kind of reverts back to what we've seen in between 1986 to 2021, which I have come to understand is not good land use planning. So it feels like into the future we're going to take a step backwards. So I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit.
Well, these reflect quite long-term cycles in these things. So we've looked at it, and we had one of the graphs in the presentation showed both the historical and the future housing. And what we see is we go through periods where there's a lot of single and semi-detached being built, for example, and then it was like the late 1980s and the late 1990s in particular, and we also go through periods where. And those ones we've built very few apartments. Then we come to periods like the current time where we're building a lot of apartments and relatively few of the singles and semis. But the notion here is that these things, work their way through the system. We kind of come back to, some measure of balance within that structure. And that's really what all these discussions about propensities and all the age-specific things that we've been talking about here from a number of the delegates and such. That's really all kind of coming back to that. Is that where is it that with these cycles going every which way? Where is it that we're kind of aimed for? Where it kind of comes out? And so this is really just saying that this very large number of apartments won't necessarily last. That there'll be some return of demand for single and semi-detached, and there will continue to be significant demand for row houses, which is more than it has been in the past for a long time. So.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing from you is it kind of ebbs and flows cyclically, not because what I have come to understand up to today was that as a city, we made a turning point and we said, okay, now into the future, we're going to do this instead. But historically, that's not how it's played out. Like you're basing your projections on what has happened historically, which is a new building type sort of surges and then we course correct, not sort of there's a new era of building type.
It's in part that, but it's not just based on the historical data. Some would suggest that we should just base it on the historical data. It's not based on that. It's based on a look at that balanced by what's going on in the marketplace. And for example, the propensities for row housing we increase in every period going forward, because if we kept them at the current rates, is that we'd see a large decline in the percentage of row houses out of the whole thing. And that just does not seem to be occurring. As well, we have increased the propensities for the duplex units, as we described, which is the ARUs, because that's been enormously successful, this program. It's like the number of ARUs in Ottawa has doubled in the last 3 years. So all the units that have ever been built before, there's twice the number of them based on the permits in the last 3 years. So it's really quite extraordinary shift there. So that's a shift that we have continued going forward as well.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. So again, then my last question back to staff, based on what's included in this report are we still on track for over 50% intensification today and then into the future? Because this report telegraphs that further urban boundary expansion is going to be needed. And again, like I think back to when we were developing the most recent official plan, it sounded like we were moving away from that in the future. But I don't get that sense today.
So Chair, staff can't comment today on what an intensification rate will look like. That will be part of the next step. The growth management strategy update will include a new, what staff is calling intensification report that looks at how intensification has occurred in the city in the past and into different types. So that will help determine what would be a rate going forward in that strategy. So that just really that response is really for the next step.
So no sense today on sort of where we're headed. That work has to be done. You can't comment on that.
Again, that work needs to be done because there's many factors, intensification or existing supply, including within the villages as well. So there's a lot of things that we need to look at going forward.
Okay. I'll just join many of my colleagues in saying that part you said about the looking at what infrastructure will be required to accommodate all of this growth. I will be keenly following that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you very much, Chair. I actually just was hoping that we could go back to the ARUs. I am very interested in what this study showed in there becoming more of an active typology for the city of Ottawa. We had a delegation speak to sort of the built form of those ARUs. I don't know if staff have a comment on that, but it was suggested that many of them are happening in basements versus having the sort of more freehold kind of designs on a single lot. Has staff seen any of that trend over the last 3 years as those units have doubled?
So Chair, that is true, and that's part of the interesting data point that Russell talked about with that doubling of those ARUs. So one thing we're trying to do in this report is we're trying to look at the building typologies that we are planning for. So under StatsCan and Census, there aren't ARUs that are classified under an apartment duplex, so they're kind of buried in the base data. So we asked Hemson to let's pull some of this out into the language that we are more used to talking about in our planning framework.
Thank you. I definitely was interested to see it highlighted. Have you found that the application of these units, have you seen a built form trend, whether it be basement or otherwise? Is that sort of what the delegate, I'm trying to get a sort of pulse check on whether the delegation was seeing something that staff was seeing.
Yes, that's true. So ARUs is, I guess, a broad concept. It includes the basement suites. It also includes some of the long semis that we've been seeing before this committee in the past. So it's a segment of missing middle, so to speak, that we're trying to capture more readily as we move forward. And there's a question earlier in the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw permits a lot of these types of dwellings. So we're trying to get a better handle on how to plan for that in our growth management strategy.
Very good, thank you. So certainly, with College Ward, we've seen a lot of these ARUs coming online, and they have been within existing envelopes because the housing is so well built in a lot of these mature neighborhoods. It's not worth tearing down, and it can be easily converted. But I am interested in some of sort of the market forces that are left out of this report when we're talking about ownership and whether or not, people will want to or be okay to rent in a basement when they want to own. I'm certainly interested in understanding how we can further incentivize, more appealing built forms under the ARU in my ward. It also definitely contributes to things that neighbors care about when we see this sort of gentle density when it comes to garbage enclosures or parking or whatever. When you're redesigning the full lot, obviously you have more site-specific controls for that under the zoning. So I'll look forward to following this along, and I appreciate the sort of highlight of this. And I wonder then when we move forward, are we gonna start using this ARU language that StatsCan is using in our reports as well?
Chair, that's a good question. We were open to feedback on whether ARU is the right label to include in our reports going forward, or a different label. We're open to that feedback.
Okay, very good. I certainly have, probably asked you enough questions about what is a unit, what is our unit, what is the true unit. So yes, maybe we can engage offline about what language makes sense moving forward with all the various additional units we can see applied. And then Chair, I'll probably just get back on to speak to the motion at the end.
Understood. Good. I have Councillor Steve DeRoche.
Thank you, Chair. I've long held the view that I would rather live in a city and be part of a government that has a city that is growing and has a very positive outlook. The contrast of that is Rust Belt cities that are in decline, that have very little economic development potential, that have a lot of social problems. They're communities that the children leave their parents because they really have no prospects of a good quality of life and a good future. And we're lucky here in Ottawa to be growing. And I can say that I've heard that while the children may leave to go to school or go for education, they can come back here, they can find jobs. And I think that's what we want to have here. It felt like 10 years ago, I could go into my community and say, we are growing and we need to grow and we need to have that positive outlook, but there will be gaps in the services in infrastructure, and there always have been. But I feel in recent years, and I think many residents do, that those gaps now are much more significant. The schools seem to be overwhelmed with portables. We hear problems in our healthcare system. We have a long list, certainly in the suburban community, of infrastructure needs, right down to the basic need of converting a rural road into an urban road so that it can serve the urban community. So when I look at these numbers, I certainly support the growth and I see the positives. But would you characterize these figures as surges in growth? Because I think that's what we've been experiencing over the last several years as cities, not just Ottawa. We cannot handle a surge in population. It needs to be managed. So would you characterize these numbers as growth numbers that can be managed, or are these surging numbers that we're going to go through a similar challenge that we have over the last 5 years?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think right at the current state we're in, growth has slowed. You have definitely gone through a surge in the last 5 years, and the level of growth during that surge is not the level of growth that is being projected here. But certainly it is a higher, on a sustained basis, it's a higher level of growth than you've had over the last 25 years. The other thing perhaps to say is that although all of our projections have sort of fairly straight line trajectories, it's not going to happen that way. It's going to be up and down as it has been in the past. So there will be periods of time where things are slow and you can manage things easier. There will be times when growth is a challenge because things are moving faster than you can keep up with in terms of servicing and infrastructure. I don't think that's going to go away.
Okay, thank you for that. That provides some comfort that we're not going to be experiencing the surges that we've seen, because again, Ottawa and many other cities, I think it was overwhelming and very difficult for us as the frontline service provider to meet the expectations of so many people. That said, I think there still is an expectation, and we've seen elections on the issue that the growth needs to be properly managed, not just at the city level, but at both levels of government. So I hope that that conversation will continue. It is a fair conversation to have, that if we're going to have growth, all levels of government need to manage it properly and accommodate it so that we can continue to be a great country. And that may mean making some priority decisions in terms of what is funded potentially at a federal level. I'm not sure I would spend money on a high-speed light rail when I see the problems that we have in our city. But that is really, again, up to the federal government, who controls the microeconomic levers, who controls the population numbers, to, again, provide assurances that the other levels of government are going to have the resources they need to manage this growth in population. Thank you very much for the information today.
Thank you very much, Councillor DeRoche. Councillor Tierney?
Great. Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm also concerned about population growth and making sure that we're making the right assumptions. We've gone through the TMP and the IMP and all these great things that help us make decisions as a city. And my understanding is we are going to go back and do the TMP earlier than what would usually be scheduled, to help with some of those projections in the future. And I just wanted to throw that in there to say that this is something that is going to be living. We're going to have to see how this goes over time. Because of course we want to build out some of the south end. I hear Ring Road, and I'm sure that there's some people in this room, if that vote came up again today, they might change their votes because we have to build in some parcels of the city that in the east we're plugged up. We have a problem, big problem. So the south can take some of the load, and same with the west. So I thought I'd just take the opportunity to throw that in there and remind people that we will be going back and looking at how the city gets around, which is going to be a big factor on how we build out in the future as well. So thank you for the time, Chair.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the brevity, Councillor. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much. Thank you. When I look at the future, I'm thinking in terms of affordability, and wondering where Ottawa Community Housing fits in, or other nonprofits, because in the past we've had a shortage of nonprofit housing and affordable housing, and I think it's put a lot of pressure on the whole system. And I think that's one of our biggest problems in terms of affordability, is because there was such a lack of funding by both levels of government, federal and provincial, for supplying money to build affordable housing. And now it's so rare and needed, and there's long waiting lists, and we're trying to do a catch up. There seems to be interest in that. So in terms of the economic policy, certainly on the federal level for sure. I just want to know what your thoughts are on that, because we've had, a good 40 years or more of, stagnation in the building of nonprofit housing, which led to, an undersupply, and we have the waiting list. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Through the chair, maybe I'll take that one. I mean, I think that FCM, AMO, they've all echoed the same thing, that municipalities are underfunded and don't have the financial tools in order to deal with the infrastructure deficit we are all facing. And then when you layer on the expectations of meeting the needs of growing communities, whether that's intensification or at the fringe of our urban boundaries, it just adds to those pressures. So I would say that the upcoming long-range financial plan discussion that'll be coming before council this year will be an important part of level setting on whether or not we're putting enough money into the right things and how that relates to our future. But I agree what was said by members of council today about the iterative nature of these master plans. They are not one and done. They have to be continually reviewed, and every time we move in one area, we have to look across and see what does this mean to our other plans. And it's not easy work, but it is the required work in order to make sure that you get the right fit. And it's definitely, with the spike of population Ottawa has experienced in the last several years, that we don't see forecasting in the HEMSIN work now. That put a lot of pressure on our other infrastructure and transportation needs. So yeah, there's a lot of work here, and I think that the next conversation we have on how we're going to pay for the work that we need and where that how we quantify that gap that the provincial and federal government really need to step into. Every municipality is doing this. What does it look like for Ottawa in particular, I think is the next place this conversation goes.
Thank you. And I see the impact when we were talking about families and affordability, and also for seniors. There's a lot of seniors that are very, very low income. So we're gonna see growth in that, I'm afraid, as that population explodes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Kelly. Sorry,
Thank you
Vice Chair Kelly.
Oh, no, that's okay. Give me time to unmute myself. Thank you, Chair. Certainly wanted to echo the concerns that many of my colleagues have raised today, particularly Councillor Kitts and Councillor Curry. I know for sure at least one of the areas that Councillor Curry is referring to, and she talks about growth infrastructure not keeping up with growth. I drive through it every day. It is dangerous. And so I'm certainly aligned with my colleagues on that and the concerns and fears of what would happen to our neighborhoods should these population numbers be realized in terms of our livability and getting around the city. And some of us not too long ago were in Toronto for the Rural Ontario Municipal Association conference and delegated with several ministers, but one of them was with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, where we raised the concern of infrastructure simply not keeping up with growth. And one of the mechanisms that they put on the table during that delegation was the idea of municipal service corporations, where cities could borrow money to invest in this infrastructure to keep up with the growth. So I was wondering, and I'm hoping that if the province is updating these numbers, that mechanisms like that have already been presented and discussed with the city. Can you confirm that these municipal service corporations is something that has been discussed with the city of Ottawa so far? And would something like that, in your opinion, help us fill that infrastructure gap that we're seeing quite regularly, and with these updated numbers, I'm sure are going to see much more of?
Through the chair. So we don't have our GM from finance or infrastructure, so I'm going to be careful as I try to answer this question and stay a little bit in my lane. But I think generally the provincial government is encouraged by the model of municipal service corporations. They're exploring this in the context of Peel region. I think that there's some benefit in some areas of the province where you have very small systems, and merging a bunch of systems under one municipal corporation, particularly, let's say, large parts of rural Ontario, might be advantageous for small municipalities that can't really manage it on their own. Ottawa already has a very large geography, as you know, merged under a single system. So I know that those conversations are happening within our own municipality as to whether or not that gives us access to capital we don't already have, whether it would make a difference. And I think that that's a good question to ask our treasurer when we bring forward the long-range financial plan.
Well, I'll make sure I'm around to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Devine.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to hear all these questions from my colleagues. I don't think anyone questions growth, nor does anyone doubt that growth is happening. I think the question for many is how to manage that growth. That's certainly for me. The Hemson report, tells us how many people, how many households are coming. What they might not be able to tell us with certainty is where to put that growth so that the city doesn't go into financial dire straits in doing so. And I do look forward to talking with staff about other processes that we can undergo that seek to take a close look, an evidence-based approach on how best to manage that growth. I want to go back to the first delegate spoke about provincial guidelines, which he said allowed municipalities to quantify the degree of uncertainty. Now, he wasn't sure from where those guidelines came from, but I had my team do some quick research. The specific reference is from the province's 2025 proposed updates to the projection methodology guideline. Yes, we are required to use the Ministry of Finance projections as a reference baseline, but the provincial guidelines do allow for recognizing uncertainty, and they support sensitivity testing by municipalities. And in fact, by these guidelines, doing so is considered by the province to be good planning practice, particularly before land needs analysis or settlement area expansion. Those two items, land needs analysis and settlement area expansion, as I understand it, are step 2 and step 3 of this process. That specific language in the planning authorities is, planning authorities shall base population and employment forecasts on the Ontario population projections published by the Ministry of Finance and may modify, as appropriate. The final version of guidance may include hypothetical scenarios to show how municipalities could implement the recommended methods. My question to staff then, if the province explicitly contemplates scenario examples, and if it is even seen by the province as good planning practice, do staff see value in requesting alternative growth scenarios prior to the completion of this 3-step process?
So, Chair, if staff may clarify, is this question related to the population projections or looking at how to provide scenarios for the ensuing housing and employment projections?
I'm sorry, Royce, that was lower than was that a question to me or a comment? And could you repeat that?
Just the clarification was, are you asking staff to ask the province for additional population scenarios?
I don't believe either of us can ask the province to do that. What I'm saying, because I heard Hemson say earlier that they themselves do scenario modeling. If that is so, I know that we haven't seen scenario modeling. I don't know if they presented scenario modeling to staff, but if in the provincial guidelines, if they explicitly contemplate scenario modeling, if they, as it sounds like they say, that they see that as good practice, particularly before land needs analysis and settlement area expansion. If this is permitted by the province, my question then to staff is, do staff see value in seeking out those scenarios? What that may mean then is either asking Hemson to show you the scenario modeling they did, or, which is why I asked you guys earlier, might you do something different before you get to step 2, whether we be asking Hemson as they go towards step 2 if they might present models. What I'm basically asking is, if the province says this is a good thing, will we be seeking it?
The references to the scenario testing there is with respect to the section that you read from the PPS, which says that you may modify the forecast, and that's certainly something we might have done in other years. And in fact, the Ministry of Finance forecasts are very high for almost all of Ontario in the 2024 version that they produced. And if we were working with that, we probably would have come up with some other scenarios and noted that because of the way it incorporated the immigration targets. It turns out in the 2025 one, we looked at it, and where we've said that we agree with them is that really that's saying is that it actually has come to like quite a good place where we don't feel that there is a need to consider the modification on it. So the scenarios are essentially what has been done by Ministry of Finance, what was done in prior years, and looking at it that way. And so it's really directed as that, and we don't think that there's really a particularly good basis to modify it in accordance with the PPS.
So am I to interpret that to mean that whereas, yes, in other times you may have taken advantage of that opportunity to modify, you're saying in the numbers that you have projected now, which as we discussed earlier, they're not foundationally based on, but they include a rather anomalous, unprecedented spike in your 2021 to 24 years. Even with that spike, which has some bearing on our projections, even with that anomaly, you don't, I'm fine to be wrong with this, but I just want to hear from you. You don't see an opportunity to revisit?
The prior year ones, the 2024 ones, did in fact take that spike and continue it through, and that's why that we would have thought they were rather too high, and did so. They have modified it to fully incorporate the the new federal immigration policy, which going forward appears to, well, it's assumed to be, stable at a little less than 1% of the population, then, which in Ontario is about 1.2% of the population, which is what the Ontario Minister of Finance uses in their projection, and that's very consistent with the historical patterns and the like. So it's reasonable in our view.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll just take it back and go over your responses, and I've got time to come back before council if I need to, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson, I don't see any other hands up on your motion.
Yeah, thank you for the indulgence, Chair. So, I brought this motion to this committee because of an experience that my office has gone through over the last 2 weeks. I believe it relates directly to projected growth and certainly the anticipation that wards like College Ward should be welcoming growth around LRT stations and in other areas that have not yet seen the likes of it before. I learned through a resident that an elementary school site was being put up for sale on open market. And so for a mature neighborhood slated for big growth, this was a really devastating way to find out about this. The closing of a school in any neighborhood is a very impactful, deeply impactful occurrence. Neighbors are both saddened by the loss of a school that they might have gone to or their family members might have gone to, but they also become quickly curious for what's going to come to the school site, which is often significant in size. And I have several closed schools in College Wards, and my residents have been anxious to know what the plans are. Over a year ago, I brought community members together with city staff to discuss a potential skills training center and childcare project on one of these sites. And at that time, as far as my discussions went with staff, the site was still in play. I later learned that the disposal policies had changed in 2023, and a school board may be allowed to go straight to private market. There had been no formal response or notification by staff in 2023 to committee or council of this change. And no longer will we be able to offer the same reassurance to our communities that municipalities have a first right of refusal on school sites. And so I've expressed my interest in this site for community purposes for a number of years. And I've received messages as a mother, of children in the OCDSB school board saying that they're disposing of sites, bringing that information to city staff, trying to reconcile between my personal life and my professional interests. And then a big sign goes up on Draper. So I've been feeling like a canary in a coal mine, but no one has been listening to me. And I appreciate that the sale of school properties is under the jurisdiction of the province. I understand they have their own reasons and market pressures and, public interest at heart. And I do understand also that city staff have to assess whether or not the purchase of a property is the right thing to do and whether or not we have a program with which to purchase it. But this process can't be ad hoc or invisible or implied. And as a council and as a corporation, we've been talking a lot about the need to be more agile. And here is an example of, I believe, where we needed better agility and responsiveness. In this case, we've had no proactive approach communicated to residents about how the city will respond to the province's and school boards changing disposal policy. And we were unable to update our information in a timely manner and take advantage of an opportunity when it presented itself. And for me, this is unacceptable. School closures are a lightning rod for the community, and we need to know that the city is constantly refreshing its land use needs, especially in older established neighborhoods for which there is no new land for things like recreational facilities, sports fields, significant dense housing, affordable housing, other priorities that are important for neighbors. These sites are precious. We need to be fully transparent on how and when the city will fight for community interests for these parcels. And so when the city finally did tell me that they were already not interested in the Draper property, it turned out that the decision they were referencing was made 8 years ago, pre-COVID, under a different city councillor and a totally different reality. And this information was not made available at the time. So this has offered me really no comfort in this process. There's been no reflection. The Planning Act has changed. Our zoning bylaw has been updated, and our growth projections emphasize today that we can't just plan for today. We have to plan long term. And over the next several decades, we will have more seniors and more school-aged children and youth. So selling ourselves short now on these parcels is frightening to me. Our own official plan recognizes that schools beyond their educational purpose also serve to provide community infrastructure and resources for a neighborhood and important opportunities to support climate resiliency and contribute to healthy and inclusive communities. I understand the city cannot control the province's actions. I think we all know this around the table, but we can control our own land use planning, our own forecasts, and in the case of school sites, the city needs to tighten up and say that we're doing everything we can to put the city's interests first as nimbly as we are able. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I don't see any more hands up. I'm kind of excited. The last time we approved growth management, or sorry, approved forecast numbers was, I think, 2019. Those growth, the forecasts get turned into a growth management strategy. That growth management strategy got turned into the 5 big ideas that led to consultations on the official plan. The adoption of the official plan has led to all the various different master plans, and then those master plans describe capital projects that have to get built, which then leads us to create the development charges that we need to charge. Then we start all over again with a new population forecast. It's a lot of fun. I love the elegance of the Ontario planning process. So with that, is the Johnson motion carried? Carried, thank you. And are the population, this is staff recommendation carried? Are we adopting these as our population forecasts?
Carried.
Carried. That is the substantial item today. We don't have any in-camera items. There was the information previously distributed on the submission to the province about the various different regulations stemming from various bills. Are there any notices of motion for our next joint committee meeting? I don't see any. Are there any inquiries to be replied to? Nope. We don't have any other business. We are adjourned until some amorphous date for the next meeting of the Joint Agriculture and Rural Affairs Planning and Housing Committee. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much to staff. And thank you to our consultants. As always, we're in good hands with you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.